Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. Here's the president of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John DeNuzzo.
Welcome to Lake George Battlefield Moments. We welcome back Sam Huntington, manager of the Crown Point Historic Site. Hello, Sam.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Again, one of our favorite historic sites, Crown Point. Now, first of all, tell our listeners about the Crown Point site. Where is it? When was it built? What happened there?
Crown Point State Historic Site is located in Crown Point, right on Lake Champlain, right near the Champlain Bridge that crosses over into Vermont. The historic site is most known for two fortifications, a French fort that was built there beginning in 1734, and a much larger British fort that was built in 1759 after the French had evacuated. But we also have a significant American Revolutionary War history as well. So the place was seized the day after the revolutionaries under Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold took Ticonderoga. It was a post through 1776 and 1777.
Now, the Council of War you're sponsoring at Crown Point on July the 2nd, what can people expect to see?
So this will be a significant event reenacting the actual Council of War that happened at Crown Point on July the 7th, 1776, when five different major leaders of the Northern Department, that's Philip Schuyler, Horatio Gates, Benedict Arnold, John Sullivan, and Baron de Woedtke, they all met in a Council of War and essentially decided on the strategy that would come next after the Americans' failed invasion of Canada. What we'll be doing on the actual day is, have reenactors, living historians, performing a vignette of what we know about that Council of War, the discussions, the reasons for their choices at that critical moment in time.
This is a different aspect. We're used to doing, or viewing purely physical recreations, reenactments, and such. And this seems a little bit more than that. Is that a fair statement?
It's true, yes. And I should say this is a tremendous opportunity for us to partner with some of our regional historic sites. So that includes Fort Ticonderoga, who has developed, the vignette itself, and some of their staff and reenactors will be actually doing the performance. And we've contributed to that process as well. We're also partnering with Mount Independence State Historic Site. But yeah, this will actually, kind of show the discussions that we think happened in the tent. And we know a fair amount about what the reasons for their decisions at the Council of War were, largely because there was a lot of letters exchanged after the fact. So Philip Schuyler, George Washington chimes in, other people sort of discussing the key decisions. And really the key decisions were to abandon Crown Point at that point as a fortified post, descend down the lake and fortify what they called the strong ground opposite Ticonderoga, which would later that month in July of 1776 become Mount Independence. When news of independence reached the Champlain Valley, they dubbed the Mount Independence.
Okay, so you mentioned you're doing this in collaboration with those several sites, including living historians from Fort Ti and elsewhere. Can you give me a flavor for where other living historians will be coming from?
So we'll have a contingent of, probably about 20, living historians who are representing the soldiers coming back from Canada. We anticipate that they'll have boats, and then actually the next day after the Council of War event, they'll be going down the lake in those historic replica vessels to Fort Ticonderoga to kind of kick off their 4th of July weekend. So it's people representing the Continental line as it pulled back from Canada.
And you mentioned the five generals. Are there any other historical characters that people might recognize the names of?
There are some. As I said, there were a lot of people who had strong opinions about the decision to leave Crown Point in particular. There are, we won't have individuals representing those people, but a number of New England officers who had been in Canada, had, been at the siege of Quebec and then withdrew down the lake, were very anxious about this decision. They were quite upset that they were retreating further down the lake, and actually wrote what becomes known as the Field Officers' Remonstrance. They penned a letter with a number of different points to Philip Schuyler, basically saying that they really thought Crown Point was the better place to fortify rather than Mount Independence. This is around the time that after the Council of War, George Washington actually writes letters to Philip Schuyler saying essentially that even though he's never seen the Champlain Valley, he always considered Crown Point to be an important post and is sort of, not exactly second guessing Schuyler's command decision as one of the leaders of that Council of War, but making sure that he's making the right decision. So some of the script itself, the vignette itself, is based on that correspondence, why Schuyler is justifying the decision back to Washington. We've sort of used that as some of the text to articulate, why they made this decision. So some of those characters, they're people. Dr. Lewis Beebe is a physician who kept a journal, and he has some pretty strong words after the Council of War for what this decision was. Wasn't particularly fond of Benedict Arnold, and at one point, Arnold was doing some what he called experiments, and suggested that maybe somebody ought to do an experiment on Benedict Arnold by sending a 1-ounce ball through his head. So there's a lot of kind of dissension in the ranks around the Council of War, and we hope to sort of fill that in and give people a sense of how difficult this decision was, and in some ways, unpopular.
I think that's great because, in retrospect, of course, 250 years now, I think we have the misimpression that there was just harmony among all these founding fathers and all these key generals, and they were completely unified under Washington and so forth. But as you're about to demonstrate, that was not at all the case.
Absolutely. This was a command decision made in a critical moment after Canada did not fall as anticipated, or the revolutionaries anticipated. They had to figure out what to do next. And, that was a difficult decision made in a critical moment, and not everybody agreed with it. So,
yeah. Well, those guys got the big bucks, right?
Yeah.
Now, for those wanting to attend, is there a cost?
There's no cost. It's free and open to the public. It'll be at 5 o'clock Thursday afternoon, early evening. We certainly expect people can and be welcomed early if they want to come and tour the grounds and see, our site museum. It's a free event, which we hope to draw a crowd.
Okay, and starts at 5 o'clock. How long do you anticipate it'll last?
So the actual performance itself will be relatively brief, but we'll have our staff on hand and at the end of the actual performed vignette, there'll be a moment of kind of interpretation and discussion where the characters will kind of break the fourth wall to sort of discuss what the public has just sort of witnessed and why it's significant. And that's really where a lot of the other things I spoke about, sort of the tension and the uncertainty will kind of get fleshed out.
Sounds very innovative and interesting. I encourage people to attend this. And Sam, from your perspective as a leader of Crown Point site, the connections of Crown Point, Ticonderoga, and our own Fort George at Lake George during this point in time, can you give us a synopsis of what that was all about, what those relationships were?
Sure, absolutely. So as the Army retreats, Crown Point is their fallback position, essentially, in the summer of 1776, and that's why they have the Council of War there. But already they were beginning to send the sick. There was a tremendous smallpox outbreak during the Canadian invasion and the siege of Quebec. They begin sending the sick down to Fort George, which continues after the Council of War and really through that summer. So it really, right around the same time of the Council of War is when they're establishing Fort George as the place where the sick will be, sent to and tended to. And Fort Ticonderoga becomes kind of the center of a long line of fortifications that stretch from Mount Independence in Vermont all the way through the Ticonderoga Peninsula and then over into what's now the town of Ticonderoga. They built another fortification in that same time period called Mount Hope. And they left a kind of advance guard at Crown Point, to sort of keep watch for the British invasion, which was coming down the lake under Guy Carleton. Even further and more connected, another place that you didn't mention was, of course, Steensboro, where they were building the vessels that would go to Valcourt. So in addition to the decision to leave Crown Point and fortify that strong ground opposite Ticonderoga, which would become Mount Independence, they begin building a road or plan to build a road down to Steensboro, which kind of connects Mount Independence down in that direction and is kind of part of that same set of decisions that come out of the Council of War.
Fabulous. It sounds fascinating. Now, following up on the Crown Point sites, Council of War, July the 2nd, Sam will be coming to Lake George for a program the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance is sponsoring on Thursday, July the 9th. Sam will be part of that, and a series of 3 presenters will be with us. Michael Gabriel, who will be speaking on the subject of his just reissued book on Major General Richard Montgomery and the failed invasion of Quebec by the Continental Army. And then Sam is going to speak about Crown Point's role and the defeating army returned from Canada on Lake Champlain. And then Dr. Richard Leach, an infectious disease specialist on the smallpox treatment rendered to over 3,000 infected soldiers at Fort George in the summer of 1776. More about that in future podcasts. I want to get back to Sam. So how do people get more information on the Council of War event at Crown Point on July the 2nd?
Well, you can certainly check out our website and Facebook pages. That's the New York State Parks website, and just look for Crown Point. Fort Ticonderoga is also doing some promotion for it, and it should come through from a lot of places. One other thing I didn't mention, too, is there's another event actually on June 28th that deals with some of the same subjects over at Mount Independence. So, and beyond that, Fort Ti will actually be doing a filmed version of the Council of War, which will get posted on their website through their Real-Time Revolution series. That'll actually be posted on the day of the original Council of War. So for anybody who's looking for more information, both before or after the event itself, there's a lot of other things happening that including, online as well, that'll help tell this story.
Super. Okay, Sam Huntington, thanks for being with us again. I look forward to seeing a lot of you this summer at Crown Point and at Lake George.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the event on July 9th. Same here. So thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, Sam. The Alliance website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Thanks for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more information or to check out the latest podcast, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and listen live on Saturday mornings to Lake George Battlefield Moments on 93.5 Lake FM.